Thanks for taking the time to download and listen to this podcast from CelticUnderground.net. I'm Harry Brady, and this is Andrew H. Smith.
Welcome to Celtic Underground today, and it's a real pleasure to. It's an old friend, I must admit, an old friend and an old colleague. But more to the point, she's here because she was a trailblazer both in Celtic circles and in Scottish journalistic circles. Welcome, Merle Brown.
Thank you for having me. It's nice to see you.
It's nice to see you too, and I've been desperate to get you on because Merle has got the receipts and the diaries. Those things she can recall.
And a good memory.
Things she can and a good memory, aye. So there's things you can recall that you probably wish you couldn't recall, but got to catapult you back to how did you get into football journalism? Let's be honest, it wasn't a natural career path for a woman 30 years ago.
No, and it was a sort of not thought out career path for me as well. It just kind of happened. It was I'd left college. I'd sort of had a few jobs, and then I liked football. I always watched football because my family watched football, and I saw a job an advert in a magazine, Scottish Football Today, asking for journalists. And at that point, I was unemployed, and I thought, maybe I could give this a go. I always liked writing. And I didn't even think, I suppose I didn't even really think about what I was doing. It was just gonna, I'll give it a go. And I wrote to them, and then they asked me to go and interview someone. So I wrote to a few clubs in Scotland and asked if I could interview the manager. And a few said yes, and some said no. Celtic said no. I remember. Liam Brady said no, we're too busy.
Right. Why does that not surprise me?
Yeah, fast forward a few months, and I actually was working for an agency and was actually at the game at St Johnstone. That was his last game, so that was quite strange. But yeah, so I then got given a job with them, and I realised then that they owned the magazine, but it was an agency, 7 Day Press, who are a press agency, a sports agency. First Press Publishing were the sort of company that owned all of that, and they took me on as a trainee. After I did an interview with Alec McLeish at Aberdeen and sold it to them, and I actually sold them it back in 1993 for about £300, and that's probably more than I would get now for selling a freelance story.
It's about 3 times as much.
Yeah. It was incredible. So they bought, because they liked it, so they bought it, and then they gave me a job, and they started me as a trainee alongside a guy who called Martin, I remember, who didn't last in the hell that was 7 Day at times. But yeah,
and it was. We should point out that there were people working round about then that people would know. But like any football fan in Scotland would know.
Yeah, so I guess it was the what I would call like the breeding ground of the top sort of tabloid journalists that are still around. Some of them still in the same jobs in the tabloids that they went into. But yeah, most folk that worked with me are well known in Scottish football journalism circles.
Do you want to name names?
So I worked, Bill Leckie was my boss, Gordon Waddell, Keith Jackson, Mark Guidi, they were my contemporaries. Actually, Mark Guidi started after me in the agency, right. And he'd been a goalkeeper. I think he'd been at St Mirren, if I remember rightly. So I don't know, he knew someone who he knew, and he came in. He was probably one, it wasn't his fault, it was nothing to do with him because Mark was great. He was one of the first kind of incidences of sexism that I encountered at the agency. We used to get expenses per week, and I found out that he, even though he started after me, he was getting £20 more a week than I was for no other reason than I was a woman.
Right.
And I, obviously being me, didn't just kind of let that slide. I actually refused to go to a game on a Wednesday night when I found out I was scheduled to go and cover Partick v Hibs or something. And I said, I'm not going, that's it, I'm going home. And of course it was all hell broke loose. I think they just couldn't understand that I would just speak up at that point at all. I just went, I'm not doing it, I'm leaving, I'm going back home. And they were like, what are you doing? You can't leave. And I said, no, you can get someone else to do it. There's another 3 here you'll live through in Glasgow. I was in Edinburgh as well, so I had to travel. I said, I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Not doing it if I'm not getting any more expenses. And yeah, it was full of incidents like that. It was quite fraught at times. I used to get sent out to buy the breakfasts, and if I bought the wrong, and that's how ridiculous it was back then. If I bought the wrong eggs, then it was, you were berated for it. And someone had a pool cue as well. They used to hit off the desks, which was
why?
Fun. Yeah, strange times. I mean, when I talk to my husband about, he's a manager and he has staff who are all 20s, 30s, and I talk to him and we laugh at, I imagine him treating his staff in this way at all. It would be.
What was the purpose of the pool cue? Just to kind of crack the whip type idea?
Probably, yeah, just to sort of waking you up. I was so terrified at times at 7 Day that I was, because it was an agency and it was all about just selling stories. So you just had to be on the phone. So I was given a book when I arrived full of football players and managers' numbers. And interestingly, the only 2 that were coded were Ali McCoist and Paul McStay. Those numbers were actually written, and you had to write them in the book in a code,
right?
Which was bizarre, but yeah. And every day
I would never remember the code.
I know, and I'd be like, oh. And every day I used to just get told to get on the phone people, and I would be like, but they're at training, because football players in the morning generally at training, phone them, speak to their wife. It was just a constant, like, you must get stories. And I obviously had applied for this job in this magazine thinking that, I have no idea, I had no concept of the pressure of that kind of work. And I used to go home and cry to my mum. I can't take it, I don't want to go. And she'd say, get back in there and show them what you're made of, and so I did, eventually.
I used to see the way they treated Keith. They brutalised them. I used to get really upset.
I mean, I think they also used the magazine at times as a sort of weird kind of boys' club thing for little in-jokes that were in the magazine, and they used to do strange things, sort of slagging off other journalists within the in the magazine.
Oh, yeah, they were obsessed with that.
Coded way. It was bizarre, and of course I was just like, what is this? This is weird. I don't understand this. And I would suggest certain things, and then they'd go, oh, that's a great idea, and then they would just sort of systematically destroy it with their own input because there were so many egos clashing. It was just no, do it this way. No, actually, and they'd be like, oh, whatever. It was a hard, strange place. And we did a lot of stuff for the Daily Sport.
Wow.
Did
newspaper. Anybody eat your hamster in Mars or something? Did you have any footballers eating?
The sports pages in the Daily Sport were just kind of standard sports stuff. So we'd phone in, do match reports and phone in the copy. But they also were in Manchester and had this kind of 9:30 cut-off time. So if you went to a match at midweek, it wouldn't be finished, but they would just take like up to their cut-off. So if you picked up the Daily Sport the next day, you'd get like half a match sport. That's the weirdest concept. It's just bizarre. It's so long, and then
more to follow tomorrow.
Yeah, it was like just strange. And then obviously,
so how did they? Sorry. So how did the kind of Celtic thing come about then?
So obviously I didn't really, well, I knew this from working there at the time, that they owned at that point the Celtic View, which they had bought the publishing rights from Celtic at that time of Celtic's history. Yeah, when it was So then
they were selling off anything. They were selling off anything. Loss making.
And they said that Donald was leaving as the editor.
Donald Cowie.
When you were there, obviously you and Joe were there, and then they wanted someone else. So obviously because they owned it, they thought, well, let's send down Merle to the Celtic View.
And how did
probably because I was
that
getting
feel?
paid not very much, and they wouldn't have to pay me. I don't know. It was a bizarre move. I don't know why they did it. In some ways, it was. I was annoyed. I found an old diary from 1993, and at the end of the year, there was an entry where I'm like, "They're sending me to Celtic. I don't think I'm happy about this." You know, I was kind of because I was kind of starting to sort of enjoy, you know, what I was doing, even though they did basically send me to St Johnstone to cover matches almost every week. So it was more
Right.
It was a bit of a that was because I lived in Edinburgh, and apparently it was easier for me to get to. I don't know why, but it was an odd one. So then they said you're going to Celtic and that's it, and I thought, oh well, okay. It was a bit daunting because I'd only been in that job for 6 months. I was only 21. You know, when I started. I mean, I was young, you know, and I thought, oh, I'm going to Celtic. And I was quite excited as well, because if you told, like, sort of, you know, 13-year-old me who loved Mo Johnston, Charlie Nicholas and Peter Grant, that I was going to work at Celtic, I would have been like, you know, would have been hyper, you know, completely hyper. So I suppose... But at the time, it was kind of odd because I sort of started in the January, and obviously that was the March that year was when Fergus took over.
Yeah, I remember. Sorry, I remember. I mean, I'm not going to lie. We were suspicious because we hated working in that environment. Yeah. We hated working for them. They hated us. I remember Bill Leckie said, "You and Joe write like 70-year-olds, and these are quite hip guys," kind of thing, and why you like that, you know. And so we were suspicious of you, and it can't have been easy for you. I don't think I always try to give people a chance, but I know it wouldn't have been easy in those early days.
No, and the players were suspicious of me as well. Right. Because the players were, I think, at that point, probably suspicious of everything that was going on. They had no, you know, they were like, what on earth's happening here? And I remember, because they thought that I was just down there as some sort of mole and was going to sell the stories, so they refused to talk to me at first, and I had to kind of go and like... And I remember getting introduced to them, and I can't remember what game it was, but it was before a midweek game, and I can't remember if it was you or whoever. And I kind of went down.
It probably was.
And they were all just sitting there staring at me sternly, and I thought, oh God. Yeah, it was, and being a woman as well, it was just, you know, it was a hard scenario, because I'd had quite strange reactions in the press box as well from other journalists when I started with 7 Day and First Press, because the first game I ever covered was in the summer of '93, and it was a friendly between Rangers and Greenock Morton and down at Capello, and nobody spoke to me at all in the press box. I arrived. I mean, I didn't even have a clue where it was going. I'd never been to Greenock in my life. I got the train and I arrived at the ground and I got into the press box and everybody just looked at me and nobody spoke to me. Not a word. And not a word at half time, and not until after the game when one of the Rangers players said, "Who is this new journalist?" And then they all went, "What's your name?" It was the most bizarre incident. Yeah.
Bloody hell. And I mean, the Celtic View, the Celtic View, the Celtic View was nearly 30 years old then. It never had a woman writing for it. And at that time, I don't think there was a woman writing across like on a national basis anywhere. I mean, there was Hazel Irvine and Sally McNair or whatever. They were involved in sports, but it wasn't in the writing side.
No, there was a few, like I asked a question of a few friends who are journalists and if they'd ever covered sport, and a few friends of mine covered sort of a decade before in the 80s, they covered junior football, which obviously must have been absolutely bonkers as well.
Oh, God,
to cover that. But there was no one until a few years after me that was in the national press boxes, if you like, you know, because at that point, by the time I got to Celtic, I had already covered things like, I'd gone up to Aberdeen and covered Aberdeen Torino, and I'd covered like Hearts v Atletico Madrid, I think, you know, I'd covered big games for national papers. I covered a Hearts game for Today magazine. I was actually shadowing Jim Roger. You remember old Jim?
Wow. Yeah,
They called Jim, poor
Jolly.
Jim, the Jolly, because poor Jim at that point was starting to sort of lose his faculties a little bit.
Yeah.
And
did he take the miner's lamp out? Remember, he used to do that occasionally. He'd bring the miner's lamp to games, and then he'd just whack it on the press box table.
He had started, I think, a couple of times for Today. He had interjected names of players that perhaps were from the past, and you know, I have parents with dementia now. I understand the way things like that work, and I don't know much about what was going on, but they sort of said to the agency, you need to send someone to shadow him, because so I had to do a match report. He did his match report, and then they would decide when they got them, you know, if his was gobbledygook, then mine would go in. But when I went, I also, because I knew him, but I had to make sure, I had to not tell him what I was doing. And he was like, you know, why are you here tonight? Who are you writing for? And I'd be like, yeah, just for the local paper. And it was like, oh God, it was. But yeah, at that point, so then when I came to Celtic, obviously I was kind of like, it was difficult because I had enjoyed doing a lot of that stuff. I'd found it exceptionally difficult at times because the press boxes were so rigid as well. You know, it was like, that's my seat and it's my telephone, because the phones were in the press boxes, because obviously we're so old, Andrew, that this is before the internet and everything, you know. It's like, so there was these big ringer phones, like everybody had a phone, and obviously if you work with an agency, you don't have a seat and you don't have a phone. So I used to just kind of have to go in and sit somewhere and sort of hope that, you know. And they used to argue with me, grown men. I was 22 years old, grown men going, that's my seat. That's my telephone. You need to move. And I'd be like, oh, this is crazy. And most of the time it was because they'd turned up at 5 minutes before kickoff, stinking of booze, because they'd been in the pub.
Yep.
So I used to say that to them sometimes too. I used to say, maybe if you got here a bit earlier, you'd get your seat. And they would be absolutely apoplectic. You know, I was an upstart, basically. You know, who's this young woman shouting at us? How dare she? No, it was.
And you were you were quite arresting. Like, I don't mean this in the wrong ways, because you had a certain boho style. You know, you like, you didn't try to fit in.
No, because it's just me, I suppose, and that's it, isn't it? And I used to get comments. Yeah, and I used to get comments on that as well from John. I used to just think, God, like, are men that basic? This is, you know,
yeah.
I can't. Yeah. And then I've learned over the years, absolutely. But it was like, they can't handle a bit, you know, you've died, oh my God, your hair is not the natural colour, and you'd be like, oh God, you know, it was a strange thing to be. But when I came to work at Celtic, you guys were great. Like, you were more on my.
Well, we weren't your typical journalists either, you know, in the sense that we didn't dress. Yeah.
But you also were more my sort of people in the sense of, you know, personality and stuff, and there wasn't that swagger and that kind of like, hey, you know, we're in the fray, we're journalists, we're amazing, you know. It was because there was always quite a strange tabloid broadsheet vibe as well in the press box, you know, and I was friendly with, of course, across that divide, because it was a bit, I don't know what it's like now, it was a bit of a divide, you know. The tabloid was a bit more swaggery and kind of, you know. Yeah. And the tabloid journalism is difficult. It's not an easy thing to do. You know, it's hard to write for a tabloid, because it's hard to write that sort of constant boom, 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 boom stuff, you know. And I, you know, obviously after Celtic, I went back to tabloids and worked in other departments, and it was equally as tough, you know, but it was also quite invigorating at times. Yeah. I mean, and the one thing that people just wouldn't really believe, one of my memories, your early days is it was like there's tables like strewn with paper, and yet there's ashtrays upon ashtrays upon ashtrays, because the three of us smoked like lungs.
You know, it was like
know.
it was talk about health and safety hazard.
I know, it was absolutely ridiculous. It's so funny because the way the mind, you have these little memories in your head of things that happened at certain times, or when you picture a place, like when I picture the first Celtic View office above the ticket office, the old pools building, you know, the wee building. It's not there now, is it? That building
No,
at
they are
all?
now, no.
Yeah, across from the main entrance. It was such a little dive of a little office, just so like grotty, but it was just. And also, if you think about the fact that everything was paper because we had books, encyclopedias
right.
of Celtic, because we didn't have the internet.
I know.
When you look back at the hard slog that we had to do of typing in like all that information that they saw in the Celtic View of like boys club results and supporters notices, was like it was handed in on bits of paper and then typed in by us and by me originally at the start. That was kind of like my first, because I remember being quite irritated at the start because I thought, I've been covering, you know, top end matches and now I'm typing this rubbish. Like,
yeah.
I was like, this is rubbish, shite this, you know, something we're swearing, it was awful. And obviously you and Joe were kind of doing the games, and then I think I did cover the reserves at Celtic for quite a long time, but I actually quite enjoyed that because at the point that I was covering the reserves every game, they won everything.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember with Frank Connor and Tom McAdam, and they won the cup and the league, and you know, it was brilliant. Whereas the first team were horrendously bad.
I know, I remember we've had with Barry Smith on, and I remember, God rest his soul. Oh, I loved, and he still is the same old Barry, but God rest his soul, Frank come up to me one time, because you done that, I think they won a double
That's
in the
right,
space in the space of a week or something, so we did a 4-page pull-out on it, because we had nothing else to write, right?
Yes.
And he come up and said, you're the only guys that ever gave me a place, and you didn't have the heart to tell him, Frank, we've got nothing else to write about.
Poor Frank.
Thank God.
Frank was brilliant though, because I used to go on the bus to the reserve games. You know, I used to just go on the team bus to the reserve games, and he once fought with people at Tynecastle, which was quite amusing, to get me in the ground because we'd arrived and it must have been a Friday early evening game, Hearts Celtic reserve game. And everybody got off the bus, and I got off the bus as well, obviously, and we went to go into the ground, and all the players went in, and he went in, and then the guy at the door stopped me and said, "Where are you going?" And I didn't have a press box ticket. It was a reserve game. But I said, well, I'm the journalist with the Celtic View, so I'm going in, you know, I'm going with the team. And he's like, no, you're not coming in. So I was kind of like, oh, okay. So he kind of made me stand outside, and then Frank came back out to get something, or to get a ticket for someone. And of course I was standing outside kind of going, I don't know what to do, and he went up, you know, you can imagine.
God.
He went bonkers, and he went, right, that's it, what you doing out here, right? And because obviously he'd worked at Hearts as well.
Yeah.
Frank. So he was, you know, he was all, everybody was like, oh, hey, Frank, you know, blah, blah, blah. So then, obviously, he went to the guy and said, when this girl, what was it? He said something like, when this girl or this woman travels with us, she's one of the boys, let her in right now. And I was just like, okay. So then anyway, I went in and I thought, but I didn't go in the dressing room, so where am I going to go now? I was sort of standing in Old Tynecastle, was like the players' lounge was right as you went in the front door to the left. So the guy said, well, just go in there. So I kind of like stumbled into the players' lounge, and there was like Gary Mackay, John Robertson, and a few other Hearts players who obviously were just kind of there, come along to watch reserves. And I was just like, hiya.
Yeah.
Sort of looking at me like, who is this? And I went, just here with Celtic, yeah, just Celtic View. So I'm just going to have a cup of tea just now and then find my way up to the press box. It was like, really bizarre scenarios at times where, you know.
And you settled quite quickly, and you won the I think, and you won the confidence of the players, and you got on really well with like a lot of the players.
Yeah,
they were.
I did, because they were all.
They weren't the alpha males, were they? Maybe that was
No.
the problem. There was a lot of good guys at
No, they
Celtic
were.
that won the
There was
swagger,
maybe
the
a
brashness.
couple who were a bit more alpha,
Right.
but there was mostly, and Paul McStay was a lovely man, and
Just such a gentleman.
And I worked with Paul later in my career. Way after I
Right.
worked at the Daily Record, I worked with Paul when he set up a magazine in Glasgow, and I did some work with him then, like years later, and still was such a gentleman. And he, I mean, Celtic, the salary that I was on at First Press, and then obviously when Celtic bought the thing back and we went on to the Celtic payroll, I was still on a terrible salary. So to make extra money, you did as well. I mean, I did extra bits of work, but nothing that was, massively sort of impinging on what we did. And I used to do stuff for the Edinburgh Evening News for their Pink, the late night Pink thing, Saturday. And I did the Celtic sort of page, because they had a Celtic page and a Rangers page that they just kind of had to have as well in the Evening News in Edinburgh. And I did the Celtic thing. It must have been the best page ever, because it was straight from the players. But the players were really happy to do it because they knew that I got extra money for it. And I remember them saying that to me. We have no problem doing interviews with you for that, Merle, because we know that you'll get paid more, and we know that Celtic pay you crap. And I was like, that's absolutely mad.
Do you remember I got the union in? We all got unionised.
Yeah.
And took it to, what's his name, Mike? What was his name? Who left under something of a cloud? Do you remember? Mike Ryan, was it? Mike Ryan?
Yes, I don't remember his name, but I know who you mean, yeah.
Mike Ryan. And then I showed them all the illustrations, because we thought we could maybe get the players to come out in support of us if we went and strike, because they wouldn't pass a picket line. And we were trying to use this for leverage. And they came back, and our wages got upped quite a lot, but they were still rotten. And I said, but these are not matching the NUJ rates.
No.
And they said, well, you just have to accept Celtic aren't good payers in your industry. And that was it.
But I used to get told at times, you play for you write for the jersey and all this as well. And I'd be like, well, I need to pay my bills, And I mean, I think that a lot of the players were underpaid as well at certain time, certainly before Ferguson arrived as well. A lot of the players were on poorer salaries too, but it was when I left to go to the Record, I mean, my salary doubled and more.
Yeah, I wasn't far off when I went to the Evening Times.
I mean, it was poor, but I suppose it was, when I look back now, it was bad, but it was so much fun as well that I suppose that countered it to a point.
It was. It wasn't. Just when you talk about Paul, a typical Paul story, I'm sure you remember this. Remember when the takeover, they wanted to, Steve Sampson, who owned First Press, we were still owned by First Press, he wanted to really capitalise on the kind of feel good. So he had players signing Celtic views, the Celtic views. So it was a different player every week. And I'll not mention the other names.
No.
But they got paid.
I remember.
They get paid a couple of £100 for it.
Yeah.
But when Paul did it, remember he come in and says, look, he gave it, he said, you guys have this. Yeah, he gave us his appearance money.
He drove back from the city centre and gave it to us and said to have a night out, which was amazing. Whereas, other players didn't.
I know. Other players have made an awful lot of money in the game. But that summed him up, didn't it?
Yeah, it did. And it was so kind because, also when he had his testimonial, we got to go to that. I had a table at his testimonial, and
that's right.
His dinner, and God, and every time there's a grey strip that comes out now, I always say to my husband, do you know what? Paul McStay's testimonial, Man United wore a grey strip, and then the fog came down so badly that nobody could see anything, and it was so awful, and it felt like such a shame.
And in some ways it was symptomatic of what happened to Paul,
It kind of was, because then it got even worse when he was going to do a column, and then they took the column back. Do you remember that?
That's
And they gave it to Jock Brown.
I'd forgotten that.
Paul was set up to do, because Paul was obviously retiring with injury, and we were kind of like, oh, well, we're going to get a column for you in the magazine. And then at the last minute, they were like, no, we don't want Paul McStay. We need Jock Brown to do the column. And we were like, and then I remember I had to phone him. Tell him. Everybody was going, I don't want to tell him. And it was just so bad.
My God. And
it was one of the weird decisions. It was weird things at that time with certain, corporate ideas and stuff that were going on.
Definitely. But you've jumped ahead, because before that, we had the takeover. And,
yes.
I mean, I can't really think what Fergus would have made of you, or he wouldn't have known what to make of you. He wasn't bad to you then, but Fergus.
No. I used to have weird conversations with him, I have to say. But I had quite a lot of conversations with him that were so random. I found him such a funny man. Like, he would come up and he would compliment you sometimes. I remember he said to me once, like, oh, I like the way you write. I was like, well, that's just as well, eh? That's my job. I also remember once we were talking about smoking earlier, and I remember when when we were moved to the open plan offices above the away end, I guess is where we were, and then I would come down the stairs through the stand onto the track, walk along towards the tunnel, and go in that way sometimes to interview the players rather than going through the inside.
Oh yeah, right.
And then after I'd done the interview, sometimes I would come back out the tunnel and I would go along to the dugout, and I'd sit down in the dugout and have a fag.
Right.
Sit and smoke, like looking around at the new stadium getting built, like, oh. And have a cup of tea and a fag, and I'd have my notebook and that, be going back before I went back up to the office. And one time Fergus came walking down the side of the pitch, and I was like, threw my fag away, had my cup of tea. I think, and it wasn't a cup of tea, and that was the thing. I had a cup, and it was Coca-Cola that was in it, and of course he sort of walked. It was really weird because he walked along, and I don't think he was even doing anything, because then he said, oh, you've got a lot, and I had a lot of stuff to carry, and he's like, well, let's carry, and I said, I'm going back to the office. Oh, I'll take that for you. I was like, okay. So he took my cup, and then he was going, what is this? Tea? I was like, no, it's Coca-Cola juice. And then he gave me a lecture about Coke being terrible. And it took the tarnish off coins, and how his wife used to send him out in the night to get cans of it at the petrol station along with cigarettes and blah, blah. And I was just like, I didn't have a clue what to say. I was just like, all right, okay. And then sort of carried, and when I came back through the office door, because it was open plan and everybody was there, and he was like carrying my stuff, and everybody was kind of going, what's going on? What's happening? And then he sort of walked right to my desk and just put it down and just went, okay, bye then.
He definitely liked you. And I mean,
yeah, it was just
the guys like Tommy and all that come in and all that, and you get I know there was some ups and downs, because I can remember you get banned or something for going through towards the players bit, but I can't remember what was behind all that.
It was there was I can't remember who. I know that certain person in the backroom staff didn't like me to go into the laundry to see Angie, and didn't like me to be down there. An older man in the backroom staff that I don't want to name.
Right.
Because
because you used to. Oh, right.
He was a bit old fashioned at times, because he was an older man, wasn't he? And he used to think. Thing is, as a woman, it's quite an odd thing, because you're sort of getting, you can't go through there because men are, men used to. Murdo McLeod came out to do an interview once with a towel on, and I was like, seriously? Paolo Di Canio came out of the dressing room once with nothing on other than a sock, not on his foot.
You got on well with people like Tommy, but there was a time where you weren't allowed through the back, which I can't remember for what reasons that was.
Yeah, I can't really recall exactly. I think I only remember there was one older backroom staff member who didn't like me going into the laundry to see Angie, and I suppose it was kind of odd at times because it was quite open, you know.
Yeah.
But I don't know whether he was just old. I don't know. It was kind of an odd one because it's always as if you know, it made me feel like I was kind of down there ogling men, you know.
Yeah.
I was down trying to do my job, and at times, like, yeah, okay, you know, I'm a young woman, of course, like, there's going to be guys who are attractive, but, you know, that's, you know, I remember when certain teams would come and all the women would come out from, you know, the offices to hang around down at the players' area to see certain players and stuff as well, you know. It was, especially when there's Italian teams in town and things, you know, I mean, it's natural, you know, it's kind of, but also I think that I remember various, you know, Murdo McLeod came out once in a towel to do the manager's interview in place of, you know, in place of Vim, and I was kind of like, oh, hi. Put some clothes on, please. It was just, you know, it's just that bizarre sort of, oh, hey there. And I'm like, oh my God, he's wearing a towel. Like, what on earth do you do? You know, and then Paolo Di Canio appeared once in a sock, which was not on his feet.
Oh, right.
And that was it. And sort of chased me around into the players' canteen. I mean, no, it was a bit, I mean, looking at how we worked then to how things in football are now is just so vastly different because, you know, it was quite a small bubble that we sort of worked in.
Yeah.
And we were really close, like the players were colleagues, you know, it was.
They were, yeah. There wasn't these kind of demarcations, or there wasn't the kind of the walls between us, or the corporate kind of, that all come in. We saw saw that changing. Yeah.
And with the Celtic view, it was like, you know, you've got a club paper and you're sort of contracted somewhere to do these interviews. And, you know, we were never sort of going to ask them really difficult questions, you know.
Yeah.
It wasn't like they were doing press with someone who was going to give them a roasting or, you know.
No.
I mean, you know, players obviously had egos as well, because I remember when we introduced in the magazine style format of View, we introduced like marks out of 10.
That was a bad idea.
Kind of, yeah, because that set the players off. Like, they were furious. And I remember being, you know, on a Monday, like on a Wednesday when it came out, getting called by, you know, shouted at by like John Collins, who was obviously quite a perfectionist. You know, why have I got a 7? You'd be like, oh God.
Yeah, I think we quickly retired that. Did we know that was? I don't know.
I think so.
That was a bad idea.
It was a sort of tabloid idea that didn't work. There was some tabloid ideas that worked, and that was definitely one that perhaps didn't work because it was pitting, you know, the players were then, I mean, they were sort of jesting each other as well, but I think it always ended up at we would give everybody the same mark pretty much because it just got so ridiculous, you know. Why did he get, and then of course I would get accused of being biased towards players that I liked, or, you know.
Yeah.
Oh God, like, this is mad. But it was.
I'd forgotten that. That was one of our stupidest ideas.
Yeah. It was a strange idea that we did, but I suppose you don't know until you try things, do you? And we were always trying to make the Celtic view a bit less dry, perhaps.
Exactly.
If I could say that.
Oh, definitely. And you were amazing for that. You had such invention and kind of bright ideas. Remember the one that was, what would you give somebody for Christmas and all that? Do you remember that one?
And I think like this random questions, and especially in the match programme as well, because obviously in the Celtic view as well, I was telling my husband again, I was like, oh, we came upon this idea for a while of interviewing a player from the opposition.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that'd never been done.
Because I had the contacts from working, you know, with other players, obviously at the agency, I could do the interviews, and it was always a player that had a Celtic connection or had played for Celtic or loved Celtic, you know, and we never ever did there was no, that didn't happen for a Rangers game. That was the game that it didn't happen for, because that would have been, nobody wanted to read a Rangers player's views and a Celtic view, and obviously, but other players, you know, we did. I guess a lot of people didn't love it either.
Do you think we had a resistance to that?
I think there maybe was, but we also did I remember writing the programme and enjoying writing the programme, trying to make it a bit more fun as well. Because programmes, even now, like when I see club programmes sometimes, they tend to be written by wonderful historians who know amazing stuff.
Right, yeah.
But it can be a wee bit dull.
Yeah. You know, we had all these mad features. I mean, one programme of the year as well at one point. We won programme of the year. Because we were doing things that weren't in other programmes. Yeah,
and also I guess that First Press at that point, publishing the programme, you know, they also had quite good design. There was some really nice designs with sort of retro covers and stuff. So it was quite a cool, you know, it looked kind of cool, you know. It did. Rather than just having a random player on the front, you know. But we also interviewed opposition players to talk through the team and stuff as well. So
I remember that one as well. That was funny as well, because it wasn't like pen picks, you know, like height 5'7", you know, weight. That wasn't any of that rubbish, because we knew that was exhausted.
Yeah, exactly. But also, like, when we did the question stuff about, you know, what side of the bed do you sleep on, and what do you have for breakfast, and what's your favourite song, and all this nonsense. And I remember at the time, some people, it's nonsense, you know, who cares, you know, and then I guess it was ahead of its time in the way, because you look at the world now and it's like, look at influencers and TikToks, and everybody's whole lives are laid bare on, you know, social media, and people have a thirst for knowing everything about a player, you know, not just what they do on the pitch, but every single thing about them, you know, if they, you know, even grown men that follow football players from their team want to know, you know, how many kids they've got and what's, you know, and it's...
Yeah. I remember one of your questions was, listen to music or watch the TV or watch football on the TV. And I always remember Simon Donnelly's answer, because my cousin said, that's exactly what I do. It's like you listen to music with the sound on the game turned down, so you're doing both.
Yeah.
I always remember that one. The other one, remember, you come up with a great idea when Celtic looked as if they were in the final of the League Cup in 97, and you said, it's been so long because it was 82 since last time we won it. Why don't we ask them all, what were you doing? Where were you the last time Celtic won the...
Yeah.
And it was Morton Vikhorst. Morton Vikhorst says, well, I was obviously at school. And his school name, it took us ages because it was about 27 characters long. And it was like... Because... I think you come up and said, I've written this down, I need to go back down, you know, like
get him to write it down.
Almost get him to type it in himself, you know, because it was like...
No, that's funny.
Absolutely bonkers. And as I say, Tommy, you got on well with Tommy and Billy Stark. I mean, they were just... They were great. We saw Tommy under a lot of pressure. We saw Tommy change it.
Yeah,
it wasn't pleasant to see necessarily.
You and I saw him a few times, well, inadvertently as well, getting caught down in an area where you're like, oh God, you can hear him shouting, or, you know, and I remember you seeing him berating one of the players and sort of came running back to me and went, move that way, go that way, don't go that way.
I know.
Yeah, and it was hard. I came back from a game on the team bus from Ibrox once, and because Tommy was, I mean, he was such a decent man, you know, and he used to let me travel on the team bus, the first team bus, like to away games and stuff. It was ridiculous, really. I mean, he just got on the bus, you know, and if he saw me standing outside Celtic Park of an evening waiting on a bus to go home, he would give me a lift into town, and he'd go, I grew up round here, don't you be standing here on your own, you know. And he was always, he would make sure, he would ask players sometimes, take Merle home, or, you know, make sure, you know, she gets to the, you know, he was a genuinely kind guy in that way. But I came back in the bus at Ibrox, and I remember fans were sort of waving at the bus, and some of the players were kind of waving back, and he just lost it. And he was shouting, basically, don't you dare wave at those fans. They've paid money to watch you play shite, basically. And we got back to Celtic Park, and he made everybody stand in the foyer. And I was kind of standing around waiting for someone to give me a lift, like from Celtic Park back to Edinburgh. And I was kind of standing around going, oh God, don't know what to do with myself, sort of hid in the corner. And he made everybody stand in a big, the big carpet press at the step, and he made everybody stand round it in a big circle. God. And just went through everyone, and it was like...
Oh, I'm glad I wasn't there for those things. But do you remember, he nearly threw me off but remember Neville Southall's testimonial? And,
oh God, yeah, I remember
in the buses, there was ashtrays, and I wasn't thinking about it. And obviously me and you smoked. And so and he ran down the bus. He goes, what the heck? It probably wasn't what the hell, but what the hell do you think you're doing? I went, I'm just having a cigarette. You know what I mean? You never. And he said, I'm just thinking about stopping the bus, and it was just dumping me off it. It was so stupid. So stupid of me.
As well, on that bus trip back, do you remember how the players had been there was cars from Honda or someone?
Oh yeah. And there was only 12 of them, or 14 of them for 18 of them or something.
So we put all the names in a hat, and Paul said, right, Merle, draw the names out, and whoever you draw out gets the car.
That's right.
And then I had some insane ability to draw basically all the names that were not even in the first. It was like Brian McLaughlin, Moody Battle, like all the sort of like poor guys that were like, everybody that was, I think Tom Boyd, I think I maybe drew his name, but there was all sorts of random. It was just so random, and then everybody was complaining, but it was like, it's been done fair and square. But then I remember some of them didn't want the car when they saw the cars because their own car was better. And oh God, it was like...
Well, I remember that story getting into the Sunday Mail, and they blamed you. They blamed you.
They did.
And it was
hellish.
It wasn't
me.
I know. I think I know who it was, but I don't want to say it. I don't want to...
A player.
Yeah.
I won't say either, but I remember finding out that a certain player was telling a lot of stories to the press that we were all probably at that point getting the blame for.
Yeah.
Because I was just like, I'm not doing that. I remember journalists would phone up the Celtic View office and talk to me, people that I knew, and then I could, it was this, they thought I was buttoned up the back. I was like, I'm not telling you anything.
No, it was like people that would just, they wouldn't give you the time of day in person. But they just must have thought, or maybe they could... The other thing was we didn't really know a lot of the time.
We didn't, no. We didn't really.
No.
We didn't know loads. I mean, sometimes we probably didn't even know what we should know.
I know. But, I mean, what's your favourite memories? I mean, obviously, I don't know about you, but it was such a great weekend. I mean... And certainly we ripped the arse out it once Celtic won the Scottish Cup, because that was just like a weightlifting, wasn't it?
Yeah.
In 95,
yeah,
remember?
It was.
We were at Willie Hawley's place, remember? What was the on the south side and all that?
Comedy.
Yeah, and people come back to me and Joe shared a flat then, and
yeah, I remember because I stayed back there.
Yeah. You. And then we had to put the View together, and obviously maybe I wasn't always thinking straight, because we decided we were going to have interviews from every single player who'd played in the 95 Cup final, and we had to have pictures to support them, and people maybe don't realise you would look through a negative in those days and it would just be a wee, what do you call those things, the things you look at, but it was like a wee magnifying glass, a wee eye. And so I picked a picture of Tom Boyd to go along with him winning it, and it wasn't until the View came out on the Wednesday, and I still hadn't realised. And you said to me, Andrew, what have you done? What have you done? And I went, what are you talking about? You said, go to page 11, or whatever it was. Have a look at this picture. And it was Tom Boyd sideways on, thrusting forwards, but you could tell he was aroused. You could tell he was aroused.
I have a copy of that somewhere.
Yeah, you could tell he was aroused. And the mad thing was, his dad phoned up the next day. Tom Boyd's father's. Remember, people used to phone up for us to go down to the front desk. Monica would get a call down.
Yeah.
And he said to me, he says, oh, I'd like to buy the picture of my son, of Tom. And I went, well, what picture do you mean? I knew exactly what it was, you know. And I had to hold my finger, I had to hold my hand a certain way. I said, do you mean this picture? You know, I'm just going to, do you mean this picture? I'm trying to point, making sure it's over. And what was it Tom Boyd said to you when you said to him, what the heck?
I think he just said at least I was excited about winning, or you could tell that. Oh God. Poor Tom. Tom's a great guy as well. He was always brilliant. He gave when Scotland played in when '98, he set up tickets for my brother who was going over and everything as well. And he went to meet him. My brother went to meet him at the hotel and stuff. I mean, he was always just, you know, really accommodating and brilliant. He was
one of the ones that there was about 3 people. If we lost to Rangers, we thought people will give us custard pies here, but he was one of the ones, and he twigged. It was like, why is it always me? You know, him or Peter Grant, wasn't it?
Yeah, Peter, and obviously Peter was my hero from childhood. And when I started at the View, and Joe found the pen pal advert that said my favourite player is Peter Grant and blew it up and put it in the dressing room wall.
Yeah.
And then they all, like, you know, came, it was mortifying. But I got to know him really well then, and he was just brilliant.
Oh, it's fantastic.
But, it was...
and it probably didn't do you any harm, because thinking you were in the Celtic View, you know, you were riding the Celtic View way back.
Yeah, that was certainly, that probably helped with all the sort of mistrust at the start. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and let's be honest about it.
I mean, the weird time, the other thing I remember, the weird time, one of the funniest things I remember was sitting next to Carl Muggleton, the goalkeeper.
Yeah. Yeah, he was a lovely guy.
A lovely guy, sitting next to him on the day of, when the day of the night of Fergus arriving, down in the foyer after training. And he said to me, I've not unpacked my boxes at the house yet. Should I bother?
All right.
And I was like, yeah, maybe not, I don't know. But he obviously knew this, you know, something new was coming, and this was not a place for him. But that was a bizarre time, because Lou McCarry as well was just the first. And when he used to jump up at the door, that wee window in the door at the View, and because he was so small, and he used to come over and he would just jump, and I never forget that. He used to see his head like appearing, and he'd be shouting at us when he was there, because generally he wasn't there.
Yes, he was so sweet to me. He was so good to me. I mean, maybe more. I got quite close to him in a way that I was detaching ever more, like, because the editor's role, because it kind of changed. So I didn't really deal with Tommy as much as you and Joe. And I wasn't really with the players, because I was just going through that transition of kind of going from...
you were keeping us in tow. Mostly trying to...
You know the one I always...
Sometimes.
You know the one I always think about as well? And it's when I let you down, and then I kind of made up for it. We had the stupid idea of, it was just before the 95 Scottish Cup final. And you'd said, do you realise Tony Mowbray's on a booking? The game was on the Tuesday night, the View come out on the Wednesday, and we said, it'll be fine, because I think it was maybe a week and a half before it, and it was Tony's Yellow Peril, because I think it would have... I don't know why we did it. It was a stupid idea.
I was thinking about this morning, actually. Weirdly, I was thinking about this morning as probably one of the worst moments.
It was horrible. I just happened to be there. Yeah. But Tony was obviously going through a lot, because he just lost his... He just lost his young wife. But do you remember we were at Hampden in that old press box?
Yeah.
And there was a foul or something, and he ran 70 yards to get right in the referee's grill, and we're watching it happening. Oh no, what's he doing? What's he doing? What's he doing?
Yeah, we were like, it was like slow motion.
Oh yeah. What you do? It was almost, it was a kind of self-destructive thing.
It was. And we were kind of like, we wanted to go, stop.
But I happened to be happy, was he? I happened to be down, and I wasn't always down there, you know, when you guys were getting player interviews, but I think maybe we needed a few, so it was like we needed every. And he come out, and he just come right up to you, and he went, you stupid girl. It wasn't pleasant. It wasn't pleasant.
No.
And I stepped in and I said, don't ever speak. I wasn't often like that,
Yeah.
but I said, don't ever speak to
No,
my
but
staff.
it was, yeah. And with hindsight, obviously, you know, he had such a terrible time, and like,
I know.
and it was so difficult for him to process that. And obviously, the older everybody gets, the more you understand how hard these things are. So, you know, because I remember just being like, oh, you know, I don't know what to do. This is awful. But I mean, I remember being typical me. I think I said something to him like, well, you didn't have to get booked, did you?
You did.
That's fight the man, you know.
I know.
Like,
Match. Kerosene.
I used to fight with them all. I mean, Pierre Van Hooydonk a couple of times. I remember telling him that I didn't know how he could get through a door the size of his head. You know.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And everybody said to me, he actually said to me, how dare you speak to me like that? Who do you think you are? And I was like, who do you think you are? Like, I'm trying to do my job and you're being, you know, about it. Because he didn't want to do an interview because he couldn't be bothered after a couple hours of training. You know, it was like kind of, oh God. Do you remember? I mean, Pierre was brilliant. I loved Pierre. He was hilarious.
He was quite a character.
But he had the ego of like, you know, when he arrived, I remember him arriving and shaking hands and hello everybody, and nobody, you know, he was unknown.
Yeah.
And then obviously, you know, he kept saying all the time, like, I won you a cup. It's just that constant, like, yeah, okay, fine, okay, God, you know, like, give it a rest now. Amazing, but enough.
Because we saw it changing from people who would have always done things for us, like the Brian O'Neills, and we're talking about Barry Smith, and we're talking Peter and Paul, and then we saw the influx of Pierre and Di Canio and Cadet, and they were only, you know, there was
George.
This is all about me kind of thing, you know.
Yeah, and George Cadet was quite strange.
Just in another planet.
And he ended up on. He did Big Brother, didn't he? In Portugal or somewhere. Bizarre. I remember he said to me once when he was obviously not getting his whatever he wanted contract-wise and stuff, and he came out and said to me, what is it they say, Merle? Every dog has their day.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. But he kept canaries in the part as well. He was an interesting guy. They were all quite interesting people, you know.
They were.
It was, yeah. They were. And I suppose the success, you know, hadn't been there for so long, so a lot of the guys, you know, were just sort of plodding along for so long as well.
Yeah.
At Celtic, thinking, is this ever going to get any better? You know, it was like you say, that 95 Cup was a big sort of release of all sorts, you know, just progression, and then the leading up to the league win was.
That's when I left. I'd left, and I always never forget the fact, because I thought, God, I feel like I'm here at the Evening Times and all that, but it just felt weird that I wasn't part of the club. I was in the club. I was actually in the.
Yeah.
And you said you're still part of this, and you took me down like to the old offices.
You hadn't left for that long at that point.
No.
So you'd been there at the start. I mean, you know, at the start of that campaign and stuff. Yeah. So, you know,
always appreciated. You make me feel
that. But it was. I mean, it was hilarious that night, because that night was also one of the nights that I wrote a piece for The View that never got put in because First Press decided, and I suppose it's interesting in terms of like time and how things might be now, because what happened when I went down after the game to do the interviews with the players, and obviously everybody was like mega hyper and there was all sorts going on, and bottles of champagne flying over everybody's head and everything, and I was standing and I got champagne poured, and then Mark Reaper picked me up in a fireman's lift,
right,
and carried me through to the bath and threw me in the bath.
God, die.
And I remember having the presence of mind to throw my dictaphone out my pocket before he threw me in the bath. I went in full everything, and I think there was only one player that was in the shower naked, so I only saw the one player naked, and that everyone else was kind of not in the bath. It was after, you know, there wasn't really. But anyway, it was quite funny because there was all sorts going on, and I'd written this colour piece for the view about, you know, sort of the behind, you know, just the way the players were feeling, because it was so intense what they'd done.
It was incredibly intense.
The way they did it as well, it was so tense, the game, you know, it was just so, like, the release was, you know, hugely, like, cathartic, you know, it was a massive thing, and everybody was just going nuts, you know, it was like, and I wrote this colour piece, but then they stopped it going in because they thought that people would think it was inappropriate if I'd suggested that I'd been in the bath.
Right.
I was like, well, I got clothes on, I got thrown in. It wasn't my choice.
From within Celtic, or do you think it was?
No, it came from First Press.
Right.
So it was an odd one.
Because it was really innocent. It was innocent.
Oh no, that's what I mean. I know, you know, I was in, and actually I was sore. Do you know, like, because when he threw me, like, it's a tiled bath, and I kind of hit my back off this sort of shelfy bit in it, and I thought, oh my God, that really hurt. And I remember the next day, hungover as well, kind of waking up thinking, oh, I've got a big bruise, like, on my back, like, from bath. And also my blazer was completely trashed, and those blazers, you know, it was like the commercial department.
Oh God, making us wear those blazers.
Oh, do you know, remember they told me once that I had to wear it when I went to Ibrox, and I said, yeah, not happening. And he used to say, wear it on the train through. I'm like, I'm not going to sit on the train from Edinburgh with a Celtic blazer on. Like,
no.
Are you mental? Like, and they had those name badges as well.
Oh God, they went through all that.
I went to have a name badge.
Corporate crap.
I dropped my name badge accidentally, obviously, down in the Hampden press box, and it disappeared. So it's buried there forever under. So we were laughing, my pals and I was like, one of these days when they dig everything up, you know, and they'll be like, what's this? Weird name badge. But it was like, we were always kind of like, but we're not public facing.
Yes.
Like, why do we need to be talked out in this outfit?
Oh God, look like Joe used to say, like 1970s Glasgow Corporation bus drivers.
They were so bad. They had big gold buttons, didn't they? They were brutal.
Oh.
But the guy who did that had come from a retail environment. You know, it was weird. It was weird. It was just weird. I mean, you could sort of understand it maybe with like your receptionist or your corporate people, you know.
Yeah. They didn't understand we weren't salespeople. Remember I said to them, don't put us in with all the rest of the people in the office, because we have to conduct interviews, we need privacy.
Yeah.
And sometimes it gets quite heated, and then they regretted it because I was always arguing with fans on the phone, remember, and shouting at people and all that.
They never understood that. And people used to phone up a lot, because people used to phone up randomly for quiz questions, because they knew that we would have, well, then the books that had the answers in it, and we'd have to fax the answer to the pub and stuff sometimes, I remember. But also you'd come in after an Old Firm game and you'd put your answer machine on, and there would just be full, and it would just be full of abuse.
Oh God. Yeah. And before the old board would take over, we were seen as a kind of oppressors in the state, and we were seen as kind of on the wrong side of it, weren't we? Getting shouted at and all that.
And then I remember having to write letters for the letters page, because we couldn't actually use any of the letters that we got in, because every single one of them basically said sack the board and worse. And I remember sitting writing letters like, I thought the team did well on Saturday, and Peter Grant had a great game. It was just absolute nonsense. Like, you know, I was musing the other week about Celtic back in the 50s. You know, absolute nonsense to fill a page, and you could see fans outside kind of, you know, raging at this machine, like, what are you doing in there? Like, you know, and I would be like, oh my God, I don't want to go out. I don't want to go into the club, because I'll get like somebody coming at me. But I mean, it was crazy.
It was
bags of letters. There was like mail bags full of stuff. It's like, fling that away. Yeah.
Oh.
That's weird.
And you obviously, you saw another era beyond me, in the sense that you were there when Anil came and all that, eh?
No, I'd left just before that.
Oh, just before that, right? Oh, sorry. Right.
Yeah. No, it was, because I was there when Fergus got booed when they lifted the flag, which was bizarre.
I know.
But, you know, it's funny because, I mean, now, if you think about, you know, I mean, Celtic would not be Celtic without Fergus's input.
Not at all. Not at all.
And what he did was incredible. I wonder when they build that statue.
Yeah, he probably deserves one. That's
I feel like, you know, it's... Yeah. I mean, he was a strange, funny little man, but he did exactly what he set out to do.
Yeah.
And obviously it was a business venture for him, and he was never going to make, you know, but I mean, football fans, I suppose, are fickle in the sense, every football fan from every club can be really fickle, you know.
Yeah.
In that they don't grasp the fullness of things sometimes, and it's just like, you know, your time, you know, we've had enough of you now because you've not bought the players that we want you to buy.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, they don't look forward enough.
I know, it was a crazy time to be there. I mean, is that the way you reflect? Somebody asked me last week.
Yeah.
I said it was traumatic. It was dramatic, and we were doing 16, 17 hours. We weren't, you know why Fergus liked us? Because he knew we weren't clock watchers. Because we would be the only people in sometimes apart from him.
Yeah.
He would see us there at 7 at night and all that, because you saw these people, just a lot of people, just fair enough. And it's, now when I think about it, I wish I'd been maybe a bit more like that. People leaving at 5:30 when you should. But we didn't leave. We kept... We had
different hours. Because we were at games as well.
Yeah, you know, hugely different hours. But I think he quite appreciated, because you could see that we were kind of, as I say, we were committed.
We were, but I think it's because we were like proud in what we were putting out as well. We wanted to have that sense of achievement of what we were doing, like where we try to change the way the Celtic View looked and sounded and felt, you know. And and then,
we did it.
Obviously, you know, we did, and we had to do the other stuff like the wee green book and whatever else.
Oh, don't! Oh, talk about figures.
The summer of hell.
Oh, remember he said he wanted us. He said, "You guys don't do in the summer. You can go and work in the ticket office." Remember, that was one of his great ideas.
I remember that, and it was like, I'm getting the union in. I'm getting the union back in. I have to find something to write quickly. And we're like, but we do this green book.
Summer special. Remember the Celtic View summer special?
Oh yeah, the summer specials. Yeah, always loved the summer special. Full of absolutely nothing, but at the same time, like, yeah, I've forgotten all about that, but I do remember that now. You can work in the ticket office. Like, I don't think that's going to happen. No.
And then we added an annual. Remember, it was the Celtic View annual as well. So, like, that spared us. The wee green book, the summer special, and the annual
saved us.
And how do you reflect when we're sitting here chatting about it all?
It was great because, you know, like I keep saying this to people when I talk about it. It's such a long time ago now. I mean, it's 30 years since I started working there. When I went to work there, it's 30 years ago.
Yep.
And I was a young woman, and I was just having a laugh as well. I was never, you know, a lot of young people now, like friends, kids and stuff, a lot of them, they're quite driven, and they seem so set up and assured in what they want, you know, and I didn't have a clue really, you know. I was just kind of winging it through life really at that point. I was just like, well, this is fun, isn't it? You know, I didn't have the concept, I suppose, of the magnitude of where we were even, or, you know.
Yeah. And what a point in time we happened to be.
And absolutely not. I was just having a laugh and enjoying what I was doing, and I really love writing, obviously, and I've continued to write, you know, for 30 years since then, but I was loving it, and it was, you know, I met loads of friends there as well, you know, and in other departments, obviously there was all, you know, it was a nice place to be.
Yeah.
As a company, you know, as a work company.
Yeah.
We always had good nights out and a good laugh and everything, and I got to meet, like, you know, and I remember when I met Charlie Nicholas when he came back to Celtic, and I was like my hero from when I was like 12, you know, and I think you sent me down to interview him, and I thought, oh my god, and I remember sitting kind of listening but not really listening, just staring at him like, it's Charlie Nicholas. Sorry, what was that? You know. But then I remember also, you know, after the Tony Mowbray thing, and I remember at the time Charlie was quite not very nice either. I remember being on the sharp end of a couple of things from him at times and thinking, oh God, right?
Especially if there was people around, especially if people was around, it's like certain people would kind of belittle you, because it was the playing to the crowd.
Yeah, there was a bit of that from some people and players and stuff, and but I mean, overall, when I look back, there was a period obviously when I left, when I was kind of, I went to work at the Record, and I did a bit of football again at the start down in the lower divisions, which was kind of odd.
Right.
Wraith Rovers v Stranraer on a Saturday afternoon, and I thought, oh God, this is brutal, But then I think my time in writing about football at that point, it'd been like 6 years, and I thought that's enough now.
Yeah.
Then I moved into features and stuff, which was a whole other part of, which was great. I mean, I thought I loved working at Celtic, though. I thought it was a great place to be in at the time.
Yeah, it was. As I said, there was a lot.
It was so ramshackle at times. So, do you know what I mean? It was
that was
so
its
ramshackle.
Charm, but that was its charm.
It had a charm of just that absolute nonsense, as well.
It was kind of homespun.
Even when Fergus took over and they were building, the stadium and everything was getting mad, going to be big, and the corporate side was kicking in, it was still nonsense, it was still a laugh. Because I remember after the league, there was a party and the came out the stand and going back across to the main stand, and I remember everybody was a bit drunk and everybody was like, don't go on the pitch, and then every single member of staff that came out the party was running across the pitch, pretending to score in the net, and the groundsmen were like freaking out. But it was the people were. It was fun. It was fun. It was. I guess I don't know now if you get that. It's all so.
It's more serious. It's more structured.
Serious.
It's more. Yeah. There's more kind of. There's more. For want of a better phrase, it's not quite health and safety, but it just feels like there's more rules governing everything, isn't there? There's more rules, and there's more barriers placed between people. People that said to me that went in after Celtic, and I said, "Oh, do you know this one? Do you know that one?" Said, "We don't really have that much to do with the football side. It's like we've got an appointed time where we speak to, we would go down at Tommy if anything happened, or would say, and they would make the time for you."
No, absolutely. And we would have access. I remember going on golf days with the players and stuff, to write pieces for the View and things as well.
Kind of colour pieces and all that, because it was different again.
And again, like obviously we were respectful of not covering everything, and they trusted us. That was the thing.
Yeah, and we never.
No, and it's. Everything now, I suppose, is quite controlled,
Controlled, that was it. I've been searching for that for a couple of podcasts. The level of control. Yeah, the level of kind of management control.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's weird. I don't know what it's like down at the front door and stuff, with fans. I went to Tynecastle with my nephew and he wanted to go and get some signatures on his Stookie, and it was I can't even remember who it was that Hearts were playing, not a big game. And the door was just open and the players' lounge was there, and I just kind of walked in, and my nephew suddenly got the sort of stage fright when all the players appeared, and then I was kind of going, who? And then they were coming out and he was like, there, and I was like, well, who is it? I don't know who that is. I've had a couple of glasses of Prosecco as well, and I don't know who that person is. Who's that player? So he's like, that's Calvin Devlin, shout him over. So we're, and then we got, and that was kind of amazing for him.
Yes.
Because he lives in Italy, and he would never get into an Inter Milan game, for instance, in that way. So I suppose there's still maybe Celtic have grown so much as an institution, a unit, a team, a company, away from, at Tynecastle is new stadium, the same at other places, but there's still a very much smaller level, if you know what I mean.
I know what you mean. And Celtic was at that level, really.
Walk in the front door, like I just said, and the guy was like, "No, come in." There was no problem with going in and standing around, and all the players coming out and getting autographs. There was a few other folk doing it as well, and it was, and I guess like that, you know, when things grow, it changes as well.
Yeah, you do lose. I mean, I'm sure they still have a kind of certain kind of link with the kind of supporters, and the players would make time.
I'm sure that
Callum McGregor's and Greg Taylor, you know, like James Forrest. But it's just by its very nature, it's not something even. It's not a criticism of anybody. It's just the way it has to be because it is.
It's just the way, of course. Yeah. Because I don't think you would, you know, because I said to my nephew, like, I don't think if this was against, you know, if this game was a European game or if it was against the Old Firm or something, I don't think we'd have the same access as well. Because, you know, you have to be careful, you know. So it was a moment, I think it was St Mirren or someone that Hearts were playing, and, you know, it was nice because I just think that I remember that sort of smallness of how Celtic was.
That kind of almost familial, you know. I mean, I know that kind of the old Celtic family thing is overplayed, but there was a kind of sense of, there was a real sense of kind of camaraderie, and it's, you know, and the players you knew then, you could still phone up Paul or Peter, and it would feel like, even if you hadn't spoken to them for 10, 20 years, or Brian and Neil, you know, there's certain, and I've done it because I've had to do it, you know, and it's like, and there's no distance between you. You just slip it back into it.
And when I was unwell, I remember getting a message from Simon Donnelly because we follow each other on Instagram. And when I was sick the other year, he was like, you know, hang on in there, Merle, and you know, and it was really nice, you know, nice, like to have that bond still, if you know what I mean.
That's yeah.
You know, and you know, it's great for a football team to do well. I mean, that's the thing. You wouldn't want to go back to the game.
Oh, you wouldn't want to go back to it. You wouldn't want to go back to it. Oh, definitely not. And I wouldn't have a podcast.
You know, in 30 years, it's phenomenal that what's happened football-wise, you know?
It is. Yeah, and it all started, as I say, and the genesis of it is all there. We saw it. We saw it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, you know?
We saw the first shoots, didn't we?
Yeah, and you could tell that it was going to grow like that. I mean, you know, you could tell that it was going to, you know...
Yeah.
You know, the stadium and everything you could see was just wow, you know.
Oh no. And incredible. I mean, like, talking of bonds, I still feel as if we share a great bond, and thanks very much for coming on.
Not at all.
I really appreciate it. It was good to talk old times. They were crazy times.
Nice to talk to you, yeah.
The ones that we can share anyway, you know.
The best boss I ever had.
Oh, don't. And also the worst.
I've not had many because I have been self-employed for 20 years.
Oh, yeah. Well, you're the best boss you ever had.
Oh, I am, I guess.
Self-love. Yeah. We're new age.
Bring me sunshine in your smile.
We hope you enjoyed that podcast. There will be more along soon. Please share the joy of Celtic Underground. Rate us wherever you can find us on your podcast provision, and also subscribe to the celticunderground.substack.com. As you'll be aware, there are two types of subscription. There's free subscription, where you get a certain amount of content delivered directly to your email address, and then there's a paid for subscription where you get even more content delivered directly to your email address as and when it comes out. Anyway, enough of me. We hope you enjoyed the podcast, and this is me, Harry Brady, saying good night and God bless. Good night.
Bring me sunshine in your smile. Bring me laughter all the while. In this world where we live, there should be more happiness. So much joy you can give to each brand new bright tomorrow. Make me happy through the years. Never bring me any tears. Let your arms be as warm as the sun from up above. Bring me fun, bring me sunshine, bring me love, sweet love. Bring me fun, bring me sunshine, bring me love.